Sarah thought she was only returning to her grandmother's abandoned cabin, but hidden behind a rotting log was a secret that would destroy every lie she believed about her family. Sarah had not seen the cabin in nearly 7 years. The last time she stood in front of it, she was 19, angry and desperate to escape the quiet little town where everyone seemed stuck in the past. She remembered throwing her bags into the car while her grandmother stood silently on the porch, holding back tears she never allowed anyone to see. "Call me when you get there," Grandma Alina had said softly. Sarah never did. At first, life in the city felt exciting. College classes, crowded coffee shops, late-night parties, new friendships. Everything moved fast enough to make her forget the loneliness she carried since childhood. Every now and then, her phone would light up with Alina's name. Sometimes Sarah answered. Most times she didn't. And whenever she did, the conversations were painfully short. "Are you eating enough?" "Yes, Grandma." "You sound tired." "I'm fine." "You should visit sometime. The cabin misses you." "Maybe next month." But next month always became another excuse. Work became more important. Relationships came and went. Birthdays passed. Holidays disappeared. And little by little, Sarah allowed distance to grow between herself and the only person who had truly raised her. Then came the phone call. 3 nights ago. A strange number. A cold voice from the hospital. "I'm sorry, your grandmother passed away peacefully this morning." The world had gone silent after that. Sarah remembered sitting on the edge of her apartment bed staring at nothing while the city noise echoed outside her window. Cars honked. People laughed somewhere below. Life kept moving like nothing had happened. But inside her chest, something collapsed. The funeral was small. Too small. A few old neighbors. A pastor. Rain falling steadily over the cemetery. Sarah stood beside the grave wearing black gloves that couldn't stop her hands from trembling. She barely listened to the prayers. All she could think about was the last voicemail Alina left 2 weeks earlier. "I know you're busy, sweetheart. I just wanted to hear your voice." Sarah had never called back. That guilt sat on her shoulders like a weight she couldn't remove. After the service, as people slowly walked away, an older man in a gray suit approached her carefully. "Sarah Collins." She nodded. "I'm your grandmother's attorney. She asked me to give you this personally." He handed her a sealed envelope. Nothing else. No explanation. Just her name written across the front in Alina's shaky handwriting. Sarah waited until she sat inside her car before opening it. Inside was a folded note. Only one sentence. "The truth is hidden behind the rotting log." Sarah frowned immediately. What truth? She turned the paper over, expecting more. Nothing. No signature. No clue. Just those strange words. For a moment, she almost laughed. It sounded ridiculous, like something from an old mystery movie Alina used to watch late at night in the cabin. But something about the note unsettled her deeply. Because Alina was never dramatic. Never careless with words. If she wrote this, she meant it. That same evening, Sarah drove 3 hours north toward the forest. The deeper she traveled, the narrower the roads became. Streetlights disappeared. Cell service faded. Tall pine trees surrounded the highway like silent walls. Rain clouds gathered overhead. By the time she reached the old dirt road leading to the cabin, darkness had already swallowed the woods. Her headlights barely cut through the fog. The cabin finally appeared between the trees exactly as she remembered it. Old wooden walls, crooked porch steps, rusted chimney, broken shutters hanging loosely in the wind. But now it looked different. Smaller somehow. Sadder. Like the life had been drained out of it. Sarah parked the car slowly and stared through the windshield without moving. The forest around her felt unnaturally quiet. No birds, no insects, only the sound of wind brushing through dead leaves. A chill ran through her body. Part of her wanted to start the engine and leave immediately. She didn't belong here anymore. This place held too many memories she spent years trying to bury. Memories of childhood dinners beside the fireplace. Snowstorms with Grandma Alina making soup in the kitchen. Long nights listening to stories about family members Sarah had never met. And underneath all those memories was the question that followed her entire life. Why did her real parents leave her? Alina never fully answered. Whenever Sarah asked, her grandmother's eyes filled with sadness. Some truths take time, she would always say. Sarah hated that answer. Now, standing outside the cabin again after all these years, that same sentence echoed inside her mind. Some truths take time. Lightning flashed across the sky. Thunder rolled through the forest seconds later. Sarah grabbed the envelope tightly and stepped out of the car. The cold air hit her instantly. The porch creaked beneath her feet as she slowly approached the front door. Then she noticed it. The old brass key hanging exactly where Alina always hid it, beneath the cracked flower pot beside the entrance. Sarah hesitated before unlocking the cabin door. The brass key felt freezing cold in her hand, even through her gloves. For a second, she simply stood there listening to the storm building behind her. Wind pushed through the trees with a low, hollow whistle, making the forest sound alive. Then she slowly inserted the key into the lock. Clicking. The door opened with a long, painful creak. A wave of dust and old wood drifted into the air instantly. The smell hit her with unexpected force: smoke, rain, pine, and something older she couldn't describe. Memories. Her chest tightened. Nothing inside had changed. The faded couch still sat beside the stone fireplace. Old books remained stacked crookedly on the shelves. The same yellow blanket her grandmother used during winters still rested over the rocking chair near the window. It felt as if Alina might walk into the room at any second carrying tea and smiling softly. But the silence reminded Sarah that would never happen again. She stepped inside carefully, flashlight trembling slightly in her grip. The floorboards groaned beneath her shoes. Rain tapped steadily against the windows, while lightning occasionally illuminated the dark corners of the cabin. Dust floated through the beam of her flashlight like tiny drifting ghosts. Sarah pulled the note from her pocket again. The truth is hidden behind the rotting log. She read it 3 times, then looked around the room slowly. What does that even mean? She whispered. At first she searched everywhere except the fireplace. Old drawers, cabinets, kitchen shelves. She checked under loose floorboards and inside closets filled with blankets that smelled like cedar and age. Nothing. No hidden letters. No clues. No truth. An hour passed. Frustration slowly replaced grief. Sarah rubbed her forehead tiredly and leaned against the kitchen counter. This is insane. Part of her wondered if Alina had become confused near the end of her life. Maybe the note meant nothing at all. Maybe grief and illness had mixed old memories together. But deep down, Sarah knew better. Her grandmother had always been sharp, even stubborn, especially about certain things in the cabin. Then suddenly, her eyes drifted toward the fireplace, toward the old log resting beside it. Dark brown, half-rotten, cracked with age. And instantly, a memory surfaced. Sarah was 8 years old again, running around the cabin during a winter storm. She remembered pretending the living room was a pirate ship while Alina cooked soup nearby. At one point, Sarah grabbed the old log during her game, trying to roll it across the floor. and Alina reacted instantly. No. The sharpness in her grandmother's voice had shocked her. Alina rushed over and pulled the log away so quickly it frightened Sarah. "Don't touch that," she said firmly. It was one of the only times Sarah ever remembered her grandmother sounding truly afraid. Back then she thought nothing of it. Now her stomach tightened. Slowly Sarah approached the fireplace. The closer she got, the louder her heartbeat became. The log looked even more decayed up close. Parts of the wood were soft and crumbling apart with mold spreading across one side. "Behind the rotting log," she whispered. Lightning flashed outside again. For a brief moment, the entire cabin lit white. Sarah knelt beside the log carefully and touched it. The wood nearly broke apart beneath her fingers. She swallowed hard, then slowly pushed it aside. Something metallic scraped beneath the floorboards. Sarah froze instantly. No way. Her breathing quickened. She shoved the broken pieces of wood farther away and brushed years of dust and ash aside with trembling hands. A small steel door appeared beneath the floor. A hidden safe. Her mouth fell open. The safe was old but solid, bolted directly into the foundation under the fireplace. Someone had intentionally concealed it for years. Her grandmother. All this time. Sarah stared at it in disbelief, while rain hammered harder against the roof. Questions exploded through her mind. Why would Alina hide a safe here? What could possibly be inside? Money. Family secrets. Something illegal. Her pulse pounded so loudly she could barely hear the storm anymore. She grabbed the brass key from her pocket quickly. This has to be it. But when she inserted it into the lock, it wouldn't turn. What? She tried again harder. Still nothing. Panic flickered through her chest. No, no, no. She examined the safe more closely with the flashlight. That's when she noticed tiny scratched numbers beside the handle. A combination lock. 4 digits. Sarah leaned back frustrated. Seriously. She tried Alina's birthday first. Wrong. Then the cabin address. Wrong again. Her own birthday. Nothing. The safe remained locked. Her breathing grew heavier with every failed attempt. Outside, thunder shook the windows violently. The cabin suddenly felt smaller. Colder. Almost as if the walls themselves were watching her struggle. Then her flashlight drifted toward an old photograph sitting above the fireplace mantel. It showed Sarah as a little girl sitting beside Alina on the cabin porch, both smiling, both wrapped in blankets during autumn. Sarah stared at the picture quietly. Something about it felt important. She stepped closer and lifted the frame. The back of it was loose. Curious, she carefully opened it. A folded piece of paper slipped into her hands. On it, Alina had written, "The day we became a family." Sarah's eyes widened instantly. Her throat tightened. Adoption day. The date her grandmother officially became her guardian. A date Sarah hadn't thought about in years. Slowly, with shaking fingers, she returned to the safe and entered the numbers. For one terrifying second, nothing happened. Then, click. The lock released. Sarah stopped breathing. Very carefully, she pulled the heavy steel door open. Inside sat 3 objects. A thick stack of old letters tied together with faded ribbon. A small velvet pouch. And an old cassette tape labeled in Alina's handwriting. For Sarah, when she's ready. Sarah stared at the cassette tape for several long seconds without touching it. The cabin had gone completely silent except for the storm outside. Rain struck the windows in uneven bursts while wind rattled the old roof above her head. Her grandmother's handwriting across the tape looked shaky and fragile. For Sarah when she's ready. A strange fear settled into her chest. Part of her wanted to leave the safe untouched and walk away before the answers inside changed everything she believed about her life. But another part, the lonely, hurting part she had carried since childhood, needed to know the truth. Needed it desperately. Sarah looked around until she spotted the old cassette player sitting beside the bookshelf near the fireplace. Dust covered it heavily, but after plugging it into the wall and pressing the power button, a faint red light flickered on. Still working. Her hands trembled as she inserted the tape. For a moment there was only static. Then, a soft voice filled the cabin. "Hi, sweetheart." Sarah froze instantly. Her grandmother. Weak. Gentle. Emotional. The sound of Aliner's voice after the funeral hit Sarah harder than she expected. Tears filled her eyes immediately. "If you're listening to this," Aliner continued quietly, "then I suppose I finally ran out of time." Sarah covered her mouth, trying not to cry. "I wanted to tell you these things years ago," the recording said, "but I was afraid you'd hate me, afraid the truth would hurt you more than the lie." Sarah slowly sat on the floor beside the safe, unable to look away from the recorder. "What truth?" she whispered. The tape crackled softly. "You spent your whole life believing your mother abandoned you." Sarah's entire body stiffened. That sentence alone reopened wounds she spent years trying to bury. Growing up, Sarah never understood why nobody wanted to talk about her parents. Whenever she asked questions, conversations became uncomfortable. Aliner always avoided details. "She loved you very much," was all she ever said. But Sarah never believed it. How could someone love a child and still disappear? As a teenager, that pain slowly turned into anger. At school, whenever classmates talked about family vacations or mothers helping with prom dresses, Sarah smiled politely while feeling hollow inside. She convinced herself she had simply been unwanted. Forgotten. Left behind. Now Aliner's trembling voice echoed through the cabin again. "Your mother never abandoned you, Sarah." Sarah stopped breathing. "She was my daughter," Aliner whispered on the tape. Tears rolled down Sarah's face instantly. "No. She became very sick shortly after you were born." Sarah shook her head slowly in disbelief. "You were only 6 months old when doctors discovered the illness. At first, we thought she would recover. She fought harder than anyone I've ever known." Sarah's chest tightened painfully. Every version of her past suddenly began collapsing. "She spent every day worrying about you," Aliner continued. "Even during treatments, even when she could barely stand, all she talked about was making sure you would be safe." Sarah cried silently now, tears falling onto her hands. The anger she carried her entire life suddenly felt unbearable. "She made me promise something before she died," Aliner said softly. Sarah looked up toward the ceiling, as if trying to hold herself together. She said, "Don't let Sarah grow up feeling unwanted." A broken sound escaped Sarah's throat. The room blurred through tears. "She loved you until her final breath," Aliner whispered. "And after she was gone, I tried my best to love you enough for both of us." Sarah pressed her hand against her chest as years of pain hit her all at once. All those birthdays spent wondering why her mother never called. All those nights crying alone as a teenager. All those moments she secretly believed she wasn't worth staying for. None of it had been true. Her mother didn't leave her. Her mother died trying to hold on to her. Sarah lowered her head and sobbed openly. "I'm sorry," she whispered through tears. "I'm so sorry." The tape continued. "I should have told you sooner," Aliner admitted. "But every time I tried, I saw how angry you were, and I was afraid the truth would destroy you before you were ready to carry it." Sarah remembered all the arguments she had with her grandmother growing up. The slammed doors, the cruel words, the accusations. You never tell me anything. Now guilt crushed her from the inside. Alina had been protecting her the entire time. Not hiding love from her. Protecting it. Then the tape paused for several seconds. When Alina spoke again, her tone had changed. Fear crept into her voice. There's something else you need to know. Sarah slowly wiped tears from her face. If anyone finds this safe before you do, burn everything inside. Sarah frowned immediately. What? There are people who have been searching for what this family hid years ago. The storm outside intensified again. Thunder shook the cabin walls. Sarah stared at the recorder in confusion. I tried to keep it buried, Alina said quietly. I tried to protect you from all of it. Protect her from what? Sarah's eyes drifted toward the velvet pouch, still sitting inside the safe. Carefully, she picked it up. Inside was an old silver necklace unlike anything she had ever seen before. Strange symbols were carved into the metal, worn smooth with age. Attached beneath it was a folded document. Sarah unfolded it slowly. At first, the words barely made sense. Property ownership, land contracts, mineral rights. Then her eyes widened. The cabin land sat above massive underground oil reserves worth millions. Sarah looked back toward the tape recorder in complete shock, just as Alina's voice whispered one final sentence that made her blood run cold. Trust no one except Daniel. Sarah stared at the recorder in stunned silence after hearing Daniel's name. Rain pounded violently against the cabin windows now, shaking the thin glass with every burst of wind. Thunder rolled across the forest like distant explosions. Her hands trembled as she looked back down at the papers scattered beside the safe. Millions of dollars. Hidden land rights. A secret inheritance. And somehow her grandmother had spent years protecting it. Protecting her. Nothing made sense anymore. Sarah picked up the silver necklace again and examined the strange symbols carved into the metal. They looked old, ancient almost. Whatever this was, it clearly meant more than money. Then suddenly, bright headlights swept across the cabin windows. Sarah froze instantly. A vehicle was outside. Then another. The sound of tires crunching gravel echoed through the storm. Her heart nearly stopped. No. Doors slammed outside. Voices. Male voices. Close. Very close. Sarah quickly shut the safe and grabbed the cassette tape, necklace, and documents, stuffing them into her backpack with shaking hands. The front porch creaked loudly. Someone was approaching the cabin. A fist slammed against the front door. Bang! Sarah jumped backward in terror. Open up! Another bang shook the walls. Sarah, we know you're inside. Her breathing became uneven. How did they know her name? She backed away slowly, eyes locked on the door while panic raced through her body. The storm outside drowned everything in chaos. Rain, thunder, shouting. Then another voice suddenly yelled from behind the cabin. Sarah. She turned sharply. It's me, Daniel. Her eyes widened. Daniel. Her grandmother's caretaker. The quiet middle-aged man who handled Alina's groceries, drove her to doctor appointments, and stayed beside her during the funeral. The only familiar face she trusted. The front door shook again, under another violent hit. Open the damn door. Sarah hesitated only a second before running toward the back entrance. She unlocked it quickly. Daniel stumbled inside, soaked from head to toe, breathing heavily. We need to leave right now, he said urgently. "What's happening?" Sarah cried. Daniel locked the back door behind him and pulled the curtains shut. "They found the cabin sooner than I expected." "Who found it?" But before he answered, his eyes dropped toward the necklace partially visible from Sarah's backpack. His face immediately changed. Fear. Real fear. "Oh no," he whispered. "What?" "You opened the safe." "How do you know about the safe?" Daniel ran a trembling hand across his wet hair. "Because your grandmother told me everything before she died." The pounding at the front door grew louder. Wood cracked. "They're not going away," Sarah whispered. Daniel stepped closer urgently. "Listen to me carefully. The people outside cannot get that necklace." "Why?" "Because they'll destroy anyone who stands in their way." Sarah stared at him uncertainly. The storm made everything feel unreal. Her thoughts raced too fast to process anything clearly. "Who are they?" Before Daniel could answer, crash! The front door burst open. Sarah screamed. Two men stormed into the cabin wearing dark raincoats, both soaked from the storm. One appeared older, maybe in his 50s, with sharp gray eyes and a heavy beard. The other looked younger but larger, his expression cold and tense. Daniel stepped in front of Sarah immediately. "You shouldn't have come here," he snapped. The older man ignored him completely and looked directly at Sarah. "You have something that belongs to our family." Sarah backed away instinctively. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The necklace," the man said calmly. "Give it to us and nobody gets hurt." Daniel's voice hardened. "Don't trust them." The younger man laughed bitterly. "That's funny coming from you." Sarah's heart pounded painfully. Everything felt wrong. Everyone sounded dangerous. The older man took a slow step forward. "My name is Victor," he said carefully, "and your grandmother stole that necklace from us 30 years ago." "That's a lie," Daniel snapped. Victor ignored him again. "Your mother was my sister." Sarah froze. "What?" The cabin suddenly felt ice cold. Victor studied her face quietly for a moment. "You really don't know anything, do you?" Sarah looked between the men in confusion. "My mother had brothers." Victor nodded slowly. "Two of them." The younger man stepped forward slightly. "I'm Michael." Sarah stared at them speechless. Her entire life, she believed she had no family besides Alina. No uncles. No cousins. No one. Daniel pointed angrily toward the door. "They abandoned your mother when she got sick." Victor's face darkened instantly. "That's not what happened." "Stop lying to her," Daniel shouted. The tension exploded between them. Rain hammered harder outside, while thunder rattled the ceiling overhead. Sarah stepped backward slowly, overwhelmed. "Stop." Everyone fell silent. Tears filled her eyes again. "I don't know who to believe." Victor reached slowly into his coat. Daniel immediately moved protectively in front of Sarah. But Victor only pulled out a thick folder wrapped carefully in plastic. "Your grandmother knew one day this would happen," he said softly. He placed the folder on the table. Inside were old photographs, hospital records, court documents, letters. Sarah flipped through them with trembling hands. Pictures of her mother smiling beside Victor and Michael as teenagers. Birthday parties. Family gatherings. Proof. Real proof. Her breathing became shallow. Then she found another document. Signed legal records showing years of lawsuits involving Alina, land ownership, and a man named Daniel Harper. Sarah slowly looked up. Daniel's face had gone pale. "What is this?" she whispered. Victor answered quietly. "After your mother died, Daniel discovered the oil reserves beneath this land. He spent years manipulating your grandmother to gain ownership. That's not true, Daniel said quickly. But now his voice lacked confidence. Victor pointed toward another document. Your grandmother found out he forged paperwork. She cut him out of her will 2 months ago. Sarah looked at Daniel in disbelief. No. Daniel stepped closer desperately. Sarah, listen to me. You lied to me. I was trying to protect you. From what? From them, Daniel shouted, pointing at Victor and Michael. Michael scoffed angrily. You mean protect the money? Sarah's chest tightened painfully. Everything Alina warned her about was unfolding exactly as she feared. Daniel's eyes darted toward the backpack containing the necklace. And suddenly Sarah understood. It wasn't fear in his face earlier. It was desperation. Daniel lunged forward. Give me the bag. Sarah screamed. Victor grabbed Daniel instantly while Michael restrained him against the wall. Furniture crashed onto the floor during the struggle. Let me go, Daniel yelled violently. You used her, Victor shouted back. I earned it. The cabin erupted into chaos. Sarah stumbled backward, clutching the backpack tightly against her chest while watching the truth unravel before her eyes. Daniel had never cared about protecting Alina. Or protecting Sarah. He wanted the inheritance. The land. The necklace. Everything. And Alina discovered it too late. That's why she hid the safe. That's why she left the message. That's why she warned Sarah to trust no one except Daniel, because perhaps even at the end, Alina still hoped he would change. But she was wrong. The realization shattered Sarah emotionally. Even now, after death, her grandmother was still trying to hold a broken family together. Daniel finally stopped fighting as Victor forced him into a chair. The storm outside slowly began calming. Rain softened against the roof. Silence filled the cabin, except for Daniel's heavy breathing. Sarah stood there frozen, emotionally exhausted. Victor looked toward her carefully. We didn't come here for revenge, he said quietly. Then why did you come? His expression softened. Because after all these years, you're still family. Sarah felt tears forming again. Family. The word sounded unfamiliar. Dangerous. But also strangely comforting. Michael stepped closer carefully. Your mother talked about you constantly before she died, he said softly. She made us promise we'd find you someday. Sarah covered her mouth as emotion overwhelmed her again. All her life she believed she was abandoned. Forgotten. Alone. But piece by piece, the truth kept destroying those lies. Victor glanced around the old cabin slowly. Your grandmother made mistakes, he admitted, but she loved you more than anything. Sarah looked toward the fireplace. Toward the hidden safe beneath the floorboards. Toward the life Alina spent protecting in silence. And for the first time since arriving at the cabin, Sarah finally understood what her grandmother truly left behind. Not secrets. Not money. A chance to rebuild the family grief had torn apart. Morning arrived slowly over the forest. Soft golden sunlight slipped through the tall pine trees surrounding the cabin, washing away the darkness and fear of the previous night. The storm had finally passed. Rainwater dripped quietly from branches, while mist floated low across the ground like fatting ghosts. Sarah stood alone on the porch, wrapped in one of her grandmother's old sweaters. The cabin looked different now. Not haunted. Not frightening. Just old. Tired. And filled with memories. For the first time since arriving there, she could hear birds again. Their soft singing echoed through the woods as if the forest itself had finally exhaled after holding its breath all night. Inside the cabin, Victor and Michael were asleep in chairs near the fireplace after staying awake most of the night talking with local police. Daniel had been taken away hours earlier. Even now, Sarah still struggled to process everything that happened. Every truth felt heavier than the last. Her mother never abandoned her. Her grandmother spent years protecting both her and the land. Daniel betrayed Alina for money. And somewhere inside all the pain and secrets, Sarah had discovered something she never expected to find again. Family. Real family. She held the silver necklace tightly in her hand and looked toward the woods. "So this is what you were hiding, Grandma," she whispered softly. A cool breeze moved through the trees. For a second, it almost felt like Alina was still there listening. Sarah smiled faintly through tired eyes. Then she looked down at the old letters from the safe resting in her lap. She hadn't opened them yet. Part of her was afraid, but another part needed to know everything now. Slowly, she untied the faded ribbon around the stack and unfolded the first letter carefully. The handwriting belonged to her mother. Sarah immediately recognized it from signatures on old hospital documents. The letter was dated 24 years earlier. Her hands trembled as she began reading. "To my beautiful little girl. If you're reading this someday, then it means I didn't get the chance to stay beside you the way I wanted." Sarah's vision blurred instantly. She wiped tears away and continued. "I need you to know something very important. None of this was your fault, not my sickness, not my leaving, not the pain you'll carry wondering where I went." A broken breath escaped Sarah's chest. All those years of self-hatred suddenly felt unbearable. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me." Sarah pressed the letter against her lips as tears rolled silently down her face. She spent her entire life craving those words. One sentence. One confirmation that she mattered to someone. And now here it was, hidden in a safe beneath a rotting log for decades. She continued reading slowly. "Your grandmother will protect you. She's stronger than she looks. She may seem cold sometimes, but that's because grief changes people. Don't hate her for the secrets she keeps." Sarah lowered her head. Guilt hit her again. She remembered every cruel argument she had with Alina growing up. Every accusation. Every slammed door. "You don't understand me. You never tell me the truth. I wish I knew my real family." Now she realized Alina heard those words while carrying unbearable grief of her own. She lost her daughter, then spent the rest of her life trying to protect the granddaughter her daughter left behind. Alone. The thought shattered Sarah completely. More tears fell onto the paper. Outside, footsteps creaked softly across the porch behind her. Victor stepped outside carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Sarah quietly before leaning against the railing. For several moments, neither of them spoke. The silence felt peaceful now instead of uncomfortable. Finally, Victor looked toward the necklace in her hand. "She wore that every day," he said softly. Sarah glanced up. "My mother." Victor nodded. She believed it kept the family connected. Sarah looked back down at the silver symbols carved into the necklace. "What do they mean?" Victor smiled faintly. "It's an old family design passed down for generations. The symbols represent loyalty, sacrifice, and protection." Sarah swallowed hard. Protection. That word followed her everywhere now. Victor stared toward the trees thoughtfully. "Your mother used to sit right here on this porch for hours," he said quietly. "She loved these woods." Sarah listened carefully. Every story about her mother felt precious now. "She laughed a lot," Victor continued. "Even after she got sick, she tried to make everyone else smile." Sarah smiled through tears. "She sounds nothing like how I imagined." Victor looked at her gently. What did you imagine? Sarah hesitated. Someone who didn't want me. Victor's expression immediately softened with pain. She adored you. The certainty in his voice broke something deep inside her. All those years of loneliness suddenly felt tragic. Not because she lacked love, but because she never knew it existed. Victor pulled an old photograph from his pocket and handed it to her carefully. Sarah stared at it in silence. It showed her mother sitting in a hospital bed holding baby Sarah against her chest. She looked exhausted and pale, but her smile radiated pure love. On the back, written shakily, were the words, "My little sunshine." Sarah broke into tears again. Victor gently placed a hand on her shoulder. She fought very hard to stay with you. Sarah nodded silently while crying. For years, she carried anger toward a woman who spent her final days fighting not to leave her. That realization would stay with her forever. Hours later, the cabin slowly began feeling alive again. Michael repaired broken furniture from the struggle during the night while Victor cleaned the kitchen. Sarah found herself helping naturally, almost as if they had known each other for years instead of hours. At one point, Michael laughed while trying to fix the crooked cabinet door. "She used to yell at me for slamming this thing," he said. Sarah laughed softly for the first time since arriving. "She yelled at everybody apparently." Michael grinned. "Yeah, especially when she cared about you." The warmth inside the cabin slowly returned with every conversation. Stories filled the rooms again. Victor shared childhood memories about Sarah's mother stealing apples from neighbors. Michael talked about camping trips near the lake. Sarah listened quietly, absorbing every detail like someone trying to rebuild an entire missing lifetime. And somewhere during those conversations, the emptiness inside her chest began healing. Not completely. Maybe never completely. But enough to breathe again. That evening, Sarah walked alone toward the edge of the forest behind the cabin. The sunset painted the sky deep orange and gold through the trees. Crickets chirped softly in the distance, while cool evening air brushed against her face. She stopped beside an old tree stump, where a leaner used to sit during summers. For a long moment, Sarah simply stood there holding the necklace. Then quietly she spoke. "I was angry at you for so long." The wind moved gently through the branches overhead. "I thought you lied to me because you didn't trust me." Tears filled her eyes again. "But you were protecting me the only way you knew how." Her voice cracked. "And I never thanked you for any of it." Sarah looked down at the necklace shining softly in the fading sunlight. Her grandmother had spent decades carrying impossible burdens. Protecting family secrets. Protecting land. Protecting memories. But most importantly, protecting Sarah's heart until she was strong enough to survive the truth. And despite every mistake Alina made, she never stopped loving her granddaughter. Not once. Sarah closed her eyes as emotion washed over her. "I understand now, Grandma." A tear slipped down her cheek. "And I forgive you." The forest remained quiet around her. But somehow the silence no longer felt lonely. It felt peaceful. Like closure. When Sarah finally returned to the cabin, lights glowed warmly through the windows. Victor and Michael sat at the kitchen table laughing over an old recipe book Alina used constantly. For the first time in years, the cabin felt like a home again. Not because of the money hidden beneath it. Not because of the land. But because love had finally returned to the place grief nearly destroyed. Weeks later, Sarah made a decision that surprised even herself. She stayed. Not forever, but long enough to rebuild the cabin alongside the family she never knew she still had. Together they repaired broken walls, replaced damaged floors, and restored the old porch where Alina once sat watching sunsets. And little by little, Sarah rebuilt herself too. She visited her mother's grave for the first time. She read every letter inside the safe. She learned family recipes, family stories, family traditions. The missing pieces of her identity slowly returned one by one. One evening, months later, Sarah stood beside the fireplace holding the final letter Alina ever wrote to her. The last line read, "If love survives after death, then I will never truly leave you." Sarah smiled through tears and looked around the cabin glowing warmly with life once again. Then she whispered softly into the quiet room, "You never did." Outside, wind moved gently through the forest trees, while warm light spilled from the cabin windows into the darkness. And somewhere beyond the silence, beyond grief, beyond secrets and pain, a family finally found its way back to each other. Moral: sometimes the deepest wounds in life are created by the truths we never hear. But love does not disappear in silence, distance, or even death. The people who protect us may not always do it perfectly, yet real love sacrifices, waits, and endures, even across generations. Forgiveness can heal what anger never could, and sometimes the family we think we lost has been fighting to find us all along. Disclaimer: this story is completely fictional and created for entertainment purposes only. All characters, events, and situations are imaginary. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental. This content is designed to inspire emotion, suspense, and storytelling enjoyment for viewers.